Welcome. This is the International Peace Coalition. This is the 56th meeting that we've had consecutively. I'm almost losing track. We've had a really wonderful development over the last year. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Anastasia Battle. I'll be moderating, as well as my co-moderators, Dennis Small and Dennis Speed. And I'm sure folks are a little bit rattled after, if you watch the US presidential debates, you might be very concerned about the state of the United States. We definitely want to discuss that and what we can do here to organize for true peace. Many of us have been getting out this petition, which I'll put in the chat later on, which endorses the Putin Peace Initiative, which this German, East German organization put together an appeal, which we endorsed the last meeting. We've been getting signatures on this. We want to get a lot more. We've also been taking this to leading officials around the world to endorse it as well, to come out and speak to this. So again, we want to thank you for joining us today. This will be a very important discussion. We want to encourage lots of reports. And also, if you're new, thank you for joining us. We also want to encourage new people to introduce themselves during the discussion period. Let us know where you're from, what organizations you're with, and what type of organizing you do. And with that, I'd like to open it up to Helga Zepp-LaRouche, who is the founder of the Schiller Institute and the initiator of the International Peace Coalition. Please go ahead, Helga.
Yes, thank you. Hello to all of you. As you just mentioned, Anastasia, last week we focused our meeting on the Putin proposal for not only to solve the Ukraine crisis by negotiation, but for an all-Eurasian security architecture, which would be open to all of Eurasia, including NATO members. And it sort of left it open if non-Eurasian NATO members would be included. Now, we were absolutely on the mark. And I think the discussions, many discussions we had in the meantime with people in Europe, in Asia, in America, Latin America, elsewhere, made very clear that the world is in an urgent need to move to a new paradigm, to leave geopolitics behind, and that we must find a general recognition of what this Putin proposal is, so that it can be discussed and, if need be changed, endorsed, whatever. Now, unfortunately, the present EU leadership is on a completely different track. Ursula von der Leyen probably will be re-elected if the European Parliament approves the choice of the European Union and Council. But there is one change in the European leadership, which I would say is really a disaster, and that is that Joseph Borrell, who was the so-called High Commissioner for Foreign Policy, who was, not exactly a person thinking as a world citizen, because he always thought that he should protect the European garden against the jungle of the rest of the world. But he is now replaced, if the European Parliament votes so, by somebody who is such a war hawk that even her own people in Estonia don't want her anymore. And I'm talking about Kaja Kallas, who openly is advertising the splitting of Russia into many pieces, and who is one of the worst war hawks. And if they get elected, they will stay there for several years. So our task is clearly cut out for us. However, I think we were absolutely on the mark in focusing so much on this Putin initiative, because just 1 week later, there is an extraordinary event taking place in Beijing today, it is the 70th anniversary of the founding of the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, which were founded in Asia, but quickly became influential in Africa and in international law and in the United Nations in general, leading to the 1955 Bandung Conference, which was the first Asian African country of a movement which soon would become the non-aligned movement. Now, our movement, the LaRouche movement, we have been involved with that due to the efforts of my late husband, who proposed an international development bank for this movement in 1975, which was very influential in shaping the Colombo final resolution in 1976. And we have been with that effort by the developing countries to overcome colonialism throughout all of these years. Now, what happened today at the Beijing conference, starting in a big ceremony in the Great Hall of the People, was that President Xi Jinping added his version of such a new paradigm, which is not identical to that of Putin's proposal, but in large part overlaps it. And I can only say it is absolutely in affinity with our own or my own Schiller Institute 10 principles. Now, what President Xi Jinping said at this meeting, he first referred to the history and the philosophy of the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. And I quote, 70 years ago, the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence were officially initiated. It marked a groundbreaking and epoch-making achievement in the history of international relations. Today, we gather here to commemorate its 70th anniversary for the purpose of carrying forward these principles under new circumstances, building together a community with a shared future for mankind and providing a strong driving force for human progress. In the course of modern history of human society, handling well state-to-state relations, jointly maintaining world peace and tranquility, and promoting development and progress for humanity have always been big topics in the mind of all nations. The 5 principles of peaceful coexistence were born in Asia, but quickly ascended to the world stage. In 1955, more than 20 Asian and African countries attended the Bandung Conference. They proposed 10 principles for handling state-to-state relations on the basis of the 5 principles and advocated the Bandung spirit of solidarity, friendship, and cooperation. And if you are interested, you should actually read the whole speech, because it is a very important document. And in the speech, he finally points to the special role of the countries of the global South in their aspiration for overcoming colonialism, overcoming underdevelopment. So I think this is a very important confirmation of our efforts, because now you have the Russian proposal, Putin's proposal, which in the meantime, many Russian officials have commented and elaborated upon. Maria Zakharova, the spokeswoman of the foreign ministry, various other officials. And now you have China bringing in his, Xi Jinping bringing in his shared future idea. And, I know that there is a general recognition that we have to elevate the whole world very quickly to the kinds of principles which we laid out in the 10 principles. This is very urgent because, what became clear also in the discussions we had since last week, many people have contributed reasons why we have to move in this direction. I think one very important element was that several speakers pointed to the absolute unsustainable of the Western financial system, where the U.S. debt is now no longer supported by the role of the dollar as a world reserve currency because of the de-dollarization going on, but also the fact that the military budget is now in competition to the debt payment. And this is just reaching dimensions which are completely untenable, and therefore an orderly reorganization of this financial system which is one of the points mentioned in the 10 principles, is extremely urgent. So I think that we have basically defined a way out. The situation in Ukraine remains utterly desperate. The idea to have a new counteroffensive on the ground when the Ukrainian forces are being, absolutely, obviously no longer in a position to do that just by the mere numbers. The situation in Gaza remains one of absolute catastrophe. All international aid organizations are warning that the famine is aggravating because of a lack of humanitarian aid and naturally any real economic development. So, I mean, our task is as urgent as it ever was and getting more urgent by the hour. But I think the end, the light at the end of the tunnel is there, because we can see how the majority of nations are moving towards a new paradigm based on completely different principles. And therefore, I think we are absolutely on the right track in what we are trying to do.
Thank you, Helga, for that overview. Like I said, I included in the chat the petition that we're getting out. Please feel free to sign yourself and share it with your organizations. We would like individuals and organizations to endorse this statement and just inform us, and we're happy to highlight names on the page itself. So next, I'd like to go to George Koo, who is a retired business consultant specializing in U.S.-China trade and the chairman of the Burlingame Foundation. Do we have you there, George?
Yeah, I'm here. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I am as disturbed as any of us by the complete lack of coverage in the media on Putin's proposal, his proposal to peace. It's been totally ignored, and I am not sure what more or what else we should be doing to bring it to the attention of the not only to the world, but especially to the American politicians, to Washington, to point out that they are playing with fire and they are approaching the ignition point and they don't seem to understand or appreciate it. I'm very interested in what anyone else have to say about how we can turn the situation around. And I certainly agree with Helga that it's getting more and more dangerous by the moment. It seems like the whole world is in favor of peace, but the most important agitator is the United States, and they're not making a step forward in the direction that would give us some comfort. So I'm hoping that we others will have something to say that will give me some comfort. That's it.
Thank you, George. Well, I'm sure we'll have a lot of ideas coming in today. especially around this petition, but also around one of our candidates will be speaking today as well. Next, I'd like to ask Professor Steve Starr, who is the professor at University of Missouri. He's the former director of the MU Clinical Laboratory Science. If you're there.
Yes, I'm here.
Here we go. Hi.
Hi. Well, thanks for having me. And I concur with the gentleman's remarks that preceded me. There is a terrible problem. We've had the media in the West has basically been co-opted for some time, both in North America, all the Western nations, the EU. It's become more, instead of an organ to inform, it's more echoes the official narratives of the governments that are in power. And as such, they say the first casualty in war is truth, but in this case, it's really profound. So there's still a narrative here that Ukraine can win the war, and we just need to send more weapons and arms. And there's America's number one, and it's a very Russophobic narrative. I think in Europe, the way I understand it, a lot of the nations are unable to even receive the Russian news service reports. And so I thought maybe I would provide some information about what I see is going on. There is a lot of alternative media that's available that you can derive information from, although you have to sift through it. But the Russian Ministry of Defense, in reaction to the recent attack that the U.S. ATACMS missiles that were sent towards Crimea, killed, there were killed and wounded. There was 120 some civilians there on the beach that were, and you all probably have heard that. But you may not have heard that the Ministry of Defense has directly accused the United States of programming the missiles, targeting them, and even pushing the button. Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, was very blunt about this. And so as an end result, the American ambassador was called to the Kremlin, given a very stern lecture, I guess. And the Russian foreign ministry says that Russia is no longer at peace with the United States. So they may not be at war, but we're not at peace. And as a result, I just learned today the Russian Ministry of Defense has given instructions that they should start making plans to respond to the drone incursions over the Black Sea. So in other words, it's very likely that in the very near future, Russia is going to start shooting down the Reaper drones and the surveillance, because those were directly involved in the Crimean attack. A lot of these, it's very complex to understand how these missile systems work, but you can't just, you have to incorporate targeting data in a very sophisticated way. It has to be programmed into the missiles, and they have to be guided, sometimes even with real-time information to their targets, particularly drones. So the Russians have become very explicit in saying that the Americans are directly involved in a hybrid war against Russia. Now, this is quite a change from anything that ever happened in the Cold War. But unfortunately, because, during that period, people seem to be aware of mutual assured destruction. And I'm not sure the politicians in the West even understand that anymore. They certainly don't seem to be afraid of the idea of a nuclear war. They speak rather blithely about it. But in the past, there was never any direct attacks on the homeland of the United States or Russia or the Soviet Union up until recently. But now, with Biden giving basically public permission to use U.S. long-range missiles to attack Russia, that's not very well received in Russia. And the example's been made that suppose Russia had given the cartels in Mexico long-range missiles and said, well, you can't hit Washington, but it's okay to hit Arizona, New Mexico, and maybe Miami Beach with a cluster of munitions. So this is so inflammatory. And, the question is, why would they do this? I think that there may be such an air of desperation in Washington, because what you're not hearing in Europe is that Russia is actually winning the war in Ukraine now. We tend to look at the war in terms of territorial gains, but the Russians have viewed it more as an attritional war, where their goal is, like one of the things they stated, was the demilitarization of Ukraine. And Colonel Douglas McGregor says that up to 600,000 Ukrainians have been killed and more than 1 million have been killed and wounded in this war. So, you know, the United States lost 404,000 people in World War II. So, and we are a much bigger nation than Ukraine. So it's just devastated Ukraine. The politicians in Washington could care less about Ukraine. This is just, they're, as Lloyd Austin said, that a U.S. Defense Secretary, the goal is to weaken Russia. And so all these things combine to a very dangerous situation now. And we're all sort of at, you know, the experts I see, like Dr. Postel, that's been on here, and Colonel Wilkerson, Ray McGovern, everybody's very upset. Larry Johnson, because we just see this inexorable movement towards escalation in the conflict that could result in a nuclear war. And so how do we get through to the public? That really is the question. I admire everything that the Schiller Institute's doing, and that's part of the reason I'm here. I don't know if there's a way to get through to the media because it's so controlled by the mainstream corporate media, but we can at least try to use alternative sources. And I actually think that what's going to happen soon is that the Russians have given up. You know, they've done everything they can to negotiate. And we can do our best to try to get that process recognized. But I think that they've decided they're going to decide things on the battlefield if Washington won't go along with this. So there's a very strong likelihood in the next few months, at least, that the Russians are going to move out as the Ukrainian lines collapse, and they're going to move forward and take more territory in Ukraine. So whether that will provoke a NATO response, I don't know. But I think it's going to be very hard to maintain the narrative that, you know, that we're winning the war, the West is defeating Russia. I think I should leave it up to Helga and some of the other people I'm more of an analyst, so my purpose here, I see, is just to try to convey what I understand is happening and the dangers, you know, and I think hopefully I'm useful in that respect. I'm not quite as adept at proposing political solutions, so I'll leave that up to the other experts here. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve Starr. I guess I'll ask Helga, would you like to respond to Steve Starr or George Koo before we move on?
Very briefly, I mean, I naturally share your worry and concern. As a matter of fact, you know, I'm in Germany, and the announcement by various Russians in the last several weeks that, you know, if Russian territory would be hit, that they would not only eliminate the weapons, you know, which caused that, but also the command centers from which they were deployed. You know, that makes Wiesbaden, they have now moved the Ukraine group from Ramstein, where Austin had created the so-called Ramstein group, calling 40 nations together regularly to discuss what weapons should be sent by whom. So now they were concerned that, you know, if Trump would win the election, then that may not function anymore. So they wanted to make this process Trump-proof, meaning that even if Trump is president, that this would go on. And by that, you know, in doing that, they shifted the deployment from the Ramstein to Wiesbaden, which now is supposed to become the headquarter, or is already the headquarter, I don't know. I mean, that for Ukraine decision-making. Now that makes Wiesbaden a very fat target, you know, if this thing goes just a few steps further. And, you know, we are not very far from Wiesbaden. So it gives you a very not so nice feeling about, you know, that you may be the... And then if you please remember, we had all these conferences, including IPC meetings, the Schiller conference, where experts were saying, you know, how they got totally abhorred participating in different NATO maneuvers in the time of the Cold War, when they realized with what ease nuclear bombs were deployed in exercises, clearly making clear that if it comes to that, Germany will be eradicated. I mean, forget it. Germany is such a densely populated, densely industrialized, actually small territorial country. And one of our participants, Professor Schreiber, was in one of the meetings where he said Germany is eminently incapable of conducting modern war simply because you have villages, cities, industry, so densely that you just erase the place if it comes to war. And he was very concerned to make that difference clear because in the translation somebody said that Germany is not war ready, but because Pistorius has now muted this idea, made it a parole that Germany has to become war ready. But Professor Schreiber made the point, Germany is completely incapable of conducting modern warfare because of the reasons I just mentioned. You are risking the very existence of the entire country. And that we have politicians who, like Scholz, who before the special military operation started in February 22, he made several speeches saying he opposes any weapon sales because it will lead to World War III. So what happened to his memory? I mean, he has forgotten many things in the meantime, including details about the cum-ex scandal and things like that. But it is a case of where you really get totally shocked about how these politicians are pushing policies which they obviously don't have any understanding of the consequences, what it means. So what we are trying to do, is on the one side, promoting the idea of a new paradigm, the 10 principles, which if you compare our 10 principles, which we made first, I want to recognize, to emphasize that because we are not Putin agents because we are pushing these principles, but Putin is now coming around to push these. I'm making a joke because the moment you say anything which sounds can be construed as being pro-Russian, they call you a Putin agent. And I want to make the point that we are not, but we are independently thinking people who come to similar reasonable conclusions like many other leaders around the world. So what we are trying to do is, to intensify the process of discussion, especially among those people who do understand why this is so dangerous, why Putin is absolutely correct when he says we are just at the point of no return. And the only people who understand why this is the case are excellent military people, because military are forced to think through the whole game plan to the end. I mean, otherwise they shouldn't start being a military. And they have to take into account what is the interest of the other and what is the intention of the other, because otherwise you cannot make strategy. So we are right now trying to expand the discussion among such people on both sides of the Atlantic. And hopefully, that will, result in some kind of that where, we have a group of people together, of prominent people, so that we can hopefully eventually have advertisements in even the mainstream media. This is costly. In the meantime, we want to get a lot of messages out in social media. So anybody who has some skills in these areas like social media, please contact Anastasia, because we are trying to build up a whole force of people who can be helpful and amplify and multiply our efforts. So please do not give up hope. I know it gets to you, but I think we have to be the warrior angels with lots of energy and lots of not let this go in the wrong way.
Right. There was a saying during the Cold War that the German villages were 5 kilotons apart. So, I mean, the German leadership needs to understand that just you put it very succinctly. Germany will be erased in any sort of major war, and Europe is very much at risk too. That's why I'm so astounded that this has continued in the way it has, because there's just a failure to recognize reality, particularly in Washington, I think. And then Europeans seem to take their marching orders from, Washington. And I even asked my students in my class, do you think the people here have forgotten the dangers of nuclear war? And most of them said yes. And part of that's because we just haven't been educated about it for decades. It hasn't even been taught in our schools. And I think a lot of the politicians that have made it into power just don't know anything at all about nuclear weapons. People learn about it from watching Terminator movies and that sort of thing, but they really have no schooling in it. So that's part of the reason why I've tried to talk about the dangers of nuclear war and put out, videos and things that discuss that. So I just strongly endorse everything you're doing. That's why I'm willing to come on and try to speak. And I haven't given up hope, or I wouldn't be here. But I know I know there's despair in my voice because when I watch this, even watching the presidential debate, I guess, maybe Trump has said that he would end the war in a day if we can get to the election before, World War III begins. And they have an election and Trump is elected. That's, I don't like either candidate, but right now that I'm just very frightened by the Biden administration and the things that they do, because they don't, don't conduct diplomacy. Biden hasn't spoken to Putin for years, I guess, and I think he's instructed Blinken and not to speak to Lavrov, and that's where the problem we have is that people are just, there's a refusal to discuss anything in Washington. So we have to get around that somehow. Maybe we can, if they can be convinced they'll lose the election, if they don't negotiate, that maybe that's our best hope.
Just said is actually an argument which was made by Maria Zakharova. She said that while Russia is joining hands with these other nations to try to build a new security architecture, that they want to put a lot of emphasis and importance on the need to keep the art of diplomacy, because she says this is something which is almost being forgotten. And, once you lose that later on, when people have plunged, these are now my words, into barbarism and you forgot how to negotiate, it will be much more difficult, because diplomacy is if you do it right, it's an art. It's the art of understanding with empathy the interest of the other, the culture of the other, the way of the thinking of the other, which does not mean you have to agree with it, but you have to understand it. Otherwise, you're like two bullies, and nothing can come out of that other than a lot of BS. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're exactly right. And how do we restore diplomacy to the United States? Because it's either our way or the highway. If you don't do what we say, we'll have a color revolution, or we'll do something. And it seems like they're not quite as proficient at that as they used to be, but they've had such a history of it over the last 20 or 30 years, especially, that it's we really are. It's very difficult to be an American these days for me, because I love my country, and I know there's a lot of good people here, but we have no representation in Washington. We really don't. I mean, they don't care. They care as much about us as they do the Ukrainians. It's all about, the concern there is remaining in power. So there's a lot of belief here that there might not even be an election, or if it is, it'll be so rigged that, either side, there's a lot of polarization that I'm not sure either side will accept the winner, whoever, if there is an election. So the fact that I'm speaking like that about the United States, that we might not have an election, tells you a lot about the circumstances here. But I know that Dr. Postal, for example, I've respected him so much over the years. He's like the preeminent expert on missile defense, and he's pulling his, he's what little hair he has left, he's pulling out, because he's terrified, just like we all are, that these fools are going to start a nuclear war. They're going to blunder into it because they think they can make Russia back down, and they believe their own propaganda. So, but we have to try our best. We have to get this word out. And I think with social media, it gives you the ability to reach so many people so quickly that never existed before. It didn't exist in, the Cuban Missile Crisis, for sure. And I think that gives us our best hope to reach out and influence people that are so far unaware of what's going on?
I mean, I can report just on a couple of things and then we can continue because I think you'll appreciate actually the report from Tim Rush from Washington, D.C., his meetings with various congressmen and senators. But one, Sarah Wagenknecht did come out discussing the Putin peace proposal, which is very important. And she did this in front of Schultz at the Bundestag, I believe it was the Bundestag meeting just the other day. Very important that this is happening. This is also coming off of what we've done, having this East German Association coming on and discussing this. It's very important. Also, however people may feel about Robert F. Kennedy, he did discuss last night in his response to the debate. He was having his own debate. The fact that this is happening, that we're facing nuclear war, and he brought up the ATACMS missiles. So this got something like 6 million views on Twitter. This is a very big audience. So this is what we're talking about. If we keep reaching out to these various people, we keep getting this message across, we can make this very aware to the population. So I think we can keep doing that. And I would actually just bring up, and maybe we can talk more about this during the discussion, that maybe we should grab some of our people who are press experts as well on this discussion today. I'll just name a few names like Lizzie and Morgan. Maybe we should sit down and have a discussion outside of this meeting so we can plan some things out in collaboration on how to get this across, because there might be various angles that different groups or organizations could take on this if we reached out to them. But unless there's more to discuss, I'll continue. So next we have Jose Vega, who is a independent congressional candidate in New York City, Bronx. Are you there, Jose?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It's great to be addressing an international audience as always. I'm sorry about what happened last night. As an American, I apologize, but hopefully a lot of you either flipped the channel or did something else with your time. I understand I'm supposed to be addressing what happened last night, but actually I want to talk about the issue of what it is that our independent campaigns are doing here in the United States and the role of the IPC as I see it, and why I'm actually not in despair, but actually completely optimistic about what we're doing. Yes, so for example, first of all, I know a lot. I mentioned this last week, and I know this week we saw a big loss of a what people call a progressive Democrat named Jamal Bowman, who lost his primary election. And so for our friends who are not in the United States, who may not understand exactly how the electoral system works, there are two elections in an election year. There's the primaries, so between the Republicans and the Democrats, they can choose who they want to represent them in the second election in the general. And the general is what actually determines who actually gets to go into Congress. Here in New York, Jamal Bowman was faced up against a primary challenger named George Latimer. And it's kind of a consensus here that whoever wins the primary will win the general election. And yes, I mentioned last week that Jamal Bowman was up against $25 million in AIPAC money, and he lost. He lost by about 18%, I believe. But here's something I want to kind of point out to people. So here in New York, in this district, in that district, what they call New York 16, right? It's composed of two neighborhoods or two counties, Westchester County and a little bit of the Bronx. 100,000 people between these two counties showed up to vote. Only 8,000 people in the Bronx, which is internationally known as a very poor part of the United States, actually showed up and voted. Out of the 100,000 people who voted altogether, only 8,000 people in the Bronx showed up. And in the Bronx, there are at least 40,000 eligible voters. And had another 12,000 or 13,000 people in the Bronx showed up and voted for Jamal Bowman, because out of the 8,000 people that came out in the Bronx to vote for Jamal Bowman, he got 86% of the vote in the Bronx. What does this mean exactly in relation to the electoral system? See, I don't believe, and I don't think the Vega for Congress campaign staff believes, and neither does Diane Sayre for Senate campaign believes, that elections end or begin on election day on November 5th. No. Election day is when people decide to elect themselves to take back their government and actually become an electoral body. And what I saw around the mobilization around keeping Jamal Bowman in, as incompetent as it was a very large mobilization of a lot of young people around the country. Okay, hundreds of people made phone calls, flew into New York, took time off work to come in and help Jamal Bowman. And of course, they handicapped themselves because Jamal Bowman's volunteer coordinators were telling the volunteers, don't mention genocide when you talk to voters. Don't talk about the fact that there's a genocide happening in Gaza right now. And don't even bring up Ukraine. Just talk about the fact that George Latimer, his opponent, is bought by AIPAC. And that's all you have to say. So you had all this wasted energy of young people ready to mobilize actually against the American Israeli Political Action Committee, and they were handicapped and they weren't actually allowed to go after that issue. But what that shows you is that there is a want of people to mobilize, to actually act, to actually get in the ring and say, you know what, I actually do want to stop a genocide, I do want to stop a war in Ukraine, and I do want to take my government back. That's what we're in right now. That's actually, I'm very hopeful, actually, because now a lot of people who weren't disillusioned in 2016 or 2020 are certainly now awake, okay, as to what they did to Jamal Bowman by getting him out of the race, and are now, maybe temporarily, but now is the time to strike, who will listen to what we have to say and what to do and how to act. And I'm talking about, this is now people who are under 35 who will do whatever we say, not because they will trust in what we say, but they'll trust in us because it will be completely different to what they've been told by all of these establishment organizations like the Justice Democrats and the Democratic Socialists of America, because we are saying we're taking the gloves off. We just tell the truth. That is our radical solution, is telling the truth. And by telling the truth, we will begin to educate the electoral body of people who vote in elections to actually decide to take back their government. And I think this is how we will begin to mobilize all of the young people who want to do something, the people who put their energy into those campaigns, not just into our campaigns, but into this IPC call as well. I mean, I know this because I had over 80 people come out and petition just for my campaign alone. Diane Sayre had 120 people come out and petition for her as well. And out of those 80 people, a lot of them were young people. Some people flew in from Missouri. Some people flew in from Ohio, North Carolina. They came to petition for me because they want to see something actually happen. So I don't see this moment as a moment of despair. I see this moment as an opportunity, because this is what we've been trying to tell people for the last, well, for me at least, for the last 10 years. I'm sure for you guys longer. And only now, with this farce of a debate that happened last night, which was probably orchestrated to replace Joe Biden. But the real question about the debate is that what it showed is who's actually running the country, because Joe Biden's not been running the country. So who actually has been running the White House? That's the better question that people should ask themselves. And a lot of people woke up this morning with that question on their mind. Who the hell is running my country? Who is negotiating with Putin or Xi Jinping or this one and that one? You put that with the information that Steve Starr said earlier, that Joe Biden and these other American officials are not allowed to talk to Lavrov, or even directly, or haven't even been talking to Putin directly. Well, who has been, if anybody? I don't know the answer to these questions. I'm just saying these are questions that are on the American people's mind, and also around the world, actually. Anybody who stayed up to watch that debate, no matter where they are in the world, have been asking themselves that question. So I think now is not a time to be hopeless or feeling down, now is the time to say, oh yeah, we have a window. A window has opened here now where people are going to want to act and do something. So we saw people mobilize around Jamal Bowman. It didn't work. Now, why? Because he didn't tell the truth. That's actually what happened. I know a lot of people might have been Bernie Sanders supporters on this call or before. It would have required Bernie Sanders to say the reason I lost in 2016 was not because of Vladimir Putin, but because of Hillary Clinton. And as we know, in that district where Jamal Bowman had lost, people like George Soros lives there, Michael Bloomberg, hedge fund billionaires live in that district. So was it really about getting Jamal Bowman out? No. And it wasn't even about his opponent, George Latimer, either. There was something else going on in that district that people did not want to investigate. And this was not a fight that Jamal Bowman wanted to actually put himself up into. So why does this involve the IPC? Well, because this is the only thing that can actually change not just the attitude of the country, but the attitude of the entire world to declare its independence. Because that's the problem that I'm facing here with my campaigns is we have to convince people that declaring their independence is worth it. It's not about going out to vote on November 5th. It's voting every day to say, I have to be free and I have to declare my independence away from stupidity, like the debate that people saw last night. And I'll just end this. I mean, if there was anything good that was taken away from that debate, verbatim, Donald Trump told Joe Biden to his face, "You are insane. Your policies are insane, and your military policy is insane. You are driving us to the brink of World War III." That is what he said verbatim. That is what he said. So that's how he ended the debate. So those are the last things on the people's minds who watched that debate, apart from everything else that happened on that debate. That was the last thing that people saw and heard. So we need to take advantage of that and say, here's what he meant. Here's why we're on the verge of World War III. And let's mobilize people who are under 35, who have all of this free time and expendable income to actually act and do something, get them on this call, or have the organizers on this call reach out to those people to get them on and actually act and mobilize, not just to spread the word, but to get people to declare their independence again.
Thank you very much for that, Jose. I see that Jacques Cheminade has raised his hand. Did you have a response to Jose?
Yes, of course, because I am also a candidate. That's what I raised a hand. So here in France, Macron has dissolved the National Assembly. It was like a poker player. He's playing poker with our lives. So what's happening is that there are three forces, three gatherings: a new pop front, the Rassemblement National, the national gathering, and then the Renaissance, Macron's party. The three of them call to continue delivering weapons to Ukraine, all of them. And they pretend to be in favor of peace. So it's an Orwellian situation. For them, peace means war. So we are intervening with all our candidates, subscribers, and even people that we gather in the streets to confront the candidates from these parties. We have also 6 candidacies, including mine. Mine is in French living abroad. It's a region who goes from Ukraine through Russia, China, until Australia. It's crazy, but it's organized like that. So we have a lot of responses because what we are saying, there is no other solution than a détente, entente, and cooperation, and a new architecture for security and development from the Atlantic to the Sea of China. And this is the basis of candidacy. We have a lot of responses on that. And we are not probably going to get many votes because it's very, very confrontational between all these three parties who are speaking only on French issues. All of them agreeing on continuing to give weapons to Ukraine. The national gathering a bit less, but still in favor of it. So we are the only peace candidates. And we confront all the other candidates, asking them, are you in favor of peace, of war? Say it clearly. And do you agree to bring in the global south for peace and for this new architecture? So we have a few answers, especially from people in the national gathering, but also on the so-called extreme left, because the base of the two who are opposed in the French situation, the people of the two forces are in fact in favor of peace, but they're betraying by their leaders. So we are there like midwives organizing a new peace movement. There are reactions. There are reactions coming just today of a group called This War Without Us, or No War as we are concerned. A few groups like that. So we are trying to gather them. They have a demo tomorrow, a few demos tomorrow, and intervene. Also, we are putting this debate on the table, and it's now ongoing. Certain people are saying what we said, are starting to say, including there are a few things appearing in the press. Let's jump on Putin's offer before it's too late. So we have this situation, and it's extremely flexible, extremely dangerous, because tomorrow, Macron being surely defeated, and his party too, there could be no majority in the National Assembly, no government in France, and no government situation. Or there could be a government with Macron and Bardella at the head of the National Front, which will be confusion, chaos, and the extreme left will go to the streets without a program. It will be a disaster. But from this disaster may come change. And we intervene and we said, change is going to come. Why? Because we believe that from a bad situation can come a much higher sense of good. And this is an opportunity. And what I'm saying in particular, this opportunity to be seized is that France changes, Macron has to go, and then we could be a partner in the Kazan meeting of the BRICS on October 22, 24. So that's one thing. Also, at another level, there are all these peace movements who have not clear, determined policy, but who are more and more converging on what we have to say. So it comes from all directions, the right, left, even center sometimes, and the population, the people, wants a government by the people, from the people, and for the people. This is what they want. It's in the French Constitution. It comes from the United States. So we have that, and I think it's very dangerous, but at the same time, it's an opportunity. I will fully agree with Jose Vega with his optimism, but optimism is only if we fight every day, and even sometimes every night.
Can I respond?
Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jacques. I invite you, I genuinely invite you to come over here and do some campaigning for your campaign over here, and then I'll go over to France and I can do campaigning for my campaign over there. I mean it. I genuinely want to invite you to come to the Bronx. I actually wanted to ask you for some advice on how I should maintain myself as a candidate, given that you actually ran for president several times. So any wisdom or advice you can impart on me would be most appreciated. And if Helga also wants to say anything too, just in general, I would invite her too. So.
Why don't you go ahead, Jacques?
Only one thing. You know very well what you are doing. You show it, and you have people around you that can support you. So we have the first circle, which is the people that work for Diane and you, and then the circle that of all this international peace coalition. And this means that step by step, and accelerating every step, we can go very far and very soon, because the people expect us. They are waiting for us. So as for your offer to come to the Bronx, not now, but I have that in my mind. Not now, because we have a lot of things to do here, and the situation is so unstable that we are needed here. and it's extremely dangerous, and it's an extremely good opportunity at the same time.
Okay, so I'll go over there, is what you're saying. Understood.
No, the campaign is going to finish this week. It was an accelerated campaign. Macron cheated everybody by organizing a campaign that lasted 2 weeks and a half. It's a nonsense.
Well, just before we go to you, George, I think Helga was going to say something in response to Jose.
Oh, no, because the first thing which came to my mind was to say that, you have to try to get quick victories, but you also have to stick to your long-time goal. I was campaigning as a chancellor candidate for Germany in, now hold your breath, 1976 as the chancellor candidate for a new world economic order. And, it took a little bit longer, but I think we are at the point I was setting out to get to.
Okay.
Okay. A couple ideas came out of this discussion this morning. I think Mr. Vega's pointing out the youth, the young people's energy and enthusiasm that should be harnessed and harnessed in the direction of using social media, because they certainly know how to use social media to get the message across that the mainstream is not covering. And I guess I failed to point out, I didn't think about it, but more and more social media is overtaking the importance of mainstream, and it's proving it to be very effective in correcting some of the false impressions and fabrications that mainstream has been providing. I also see some glimmer of hope from the mainstream. Recently, The Economist, to my amazement, covered how China's advance in science technology has surpassed the United States in many directions, in many ways. And I didn't expect The Economist to give such a coverage. I also, I personally follow much closely the relationship U.S. had with China. And I was totally amazed when Reuters reported on how Pentagon had this social media campaign to badmouth the vaccine that China was providing to the Philippines free of charge, and was the only vaccine available to the Filipinos because the United States was sitting on their vaccine and wasn't about to give it free to anyone. And the cost of that was unconscionable because the Filipinos population became very wary and suspicious and fearful and did not accept the vaccination that was being provided, all because the Pentagon did not want a closer relationship between China and the Philippines. Consequently, millions of Filipinos died needlessly. That's a kind of social media message that we need to work on and get out. And I agree with anyone who's watched the debate last night. We see a doddering old man who is totally incapable of running a country. And so the question is, who is running the country? I think it's very clear to me there's a group of neoconservatives that has actually taken over the White House, and they are pro-war. They are in favor of continuing hegemony and trying to dominate the world. And whether that leads to nuclear holocaust or not, they don't seem to care, or they don't seem to believe that it can happen. So again, I guess we need to resort to social media as a counterpoint to what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you, George. I do want to make sure we get, so I think going into this discussion, it's important to get this report from Tim Rush, who was just at Capitol Hill in DC meeting him and was it Kevin Gribrock or Jerry Belsky, one of the two. Both of them are amazing. They were doing a number of meetings on Capitol Hill. Why don't you give your report, Tim, to contribute to the discussion?
Sure. Greetings to everybody. We had a delegation of about 4 from the Schiller Institute, the LaRouche movement on Capitol Hill yesterday. Very fruitful 8 meetings, 2 more set by Zoom for early next week, generally at a senior level in staff. It wasn't directly with Congress people. And I want to highlight an irony. These were arranged for us courtesy of Ukraine and NATO. They made the mistake of putting huge numbers of the U.S. Congress on the latest of the Ukrainian hit lists as information terrorists or Putin propagandists. This is something called TXT, the 4th of various lists that the center in a certain way is called the Center for Countering Disinformation right in Zelensky's office. There's a very ugly wet works related thing called Miravorets. There's another thing called Molfar. The 4th is this thing that's known as TXT. They have overlapping lists of targets, and the first one, which was put out 2 years ago by the Center for Countering Disinformation, had of its first 60 or 70 people, 30 from the Schiller Institute or people who had spoken at our conferences. So we've been very much doing good work to draw their attention. It's all coordinated from higher levels of NATO PSYOPs, psychological warfare units, so-called counter disinformation and fact-checking. EIR, the news service, has done a tremendous job outlining this. So what happened is that they put every U.S. congressperson who had voted against further funding for Ukraine in the end of April on their latest list. So that's 112 congressmen and 21 U.S. senators, all Republicans. And that caught fire. It got the attention of Congress that so many have been put on it. So when we walked in and said we wanted to meet with them and go through what's really running this show and how dangerous it is, because it's really a component of the drive to push in the using Ukraine as the proxy toward nuclear chicken game dynamics. So these 8 meetings jumped out at us once we made the request. We had not met with any of these offices before, 4 of them on the Senate side, 4 on the House. And the remarkable thing is that we were, they were reactive to the fact their names were on this list. We said the real issue is halting this drive toward nuclear confrontation. You must pick up the Putin offer of June 14th, and we went through the kind of thing that we've been discussing in these IPC meetings in terms of the escalations around the attempted blinding of the Armavir, the Russian early warning radar stations, the attack at Crimea, obviously citing the British chief military think tank Rusi, saying that they deliberately wanted to create a Cuba missile crisis on steroids over Crimea. This got their attention. And except in one case, very significant engagement on the urgency of moving on the issue of these negotiations. These are not staff who can speak for the members of Congress directly, but they were gripped. And what was very useful, maybe it can be posted in the chat, is the statement from Diane Sayre, the candidate, the LaRouche independent candidate in New York for Senate, that went out yesterday morning. The headline on it, let me just bring it up here one second, is "Don't repeat the mistake of December 2021. Putin's Ukraine-Russia peace plan is our best option." I stress this because it was very important in these offices to recognize that in this degraded electoral scene in the United States, that what we were presenting to them as the paramount urgent matter that they have to address in terms of steering away from nuclear war is represented through these campaigns as a voice in the electoral process in the United States. Several of these offices are in New York, but all of them paid attention to that very, very solidly. They also paid attention, and we brought it to their attention, the remarks by Chaz Freeman, a dean, if not the dean of the U.S. Diplomatic Corps, who had spoken at the Schiller Conference on, we're at the brink, we need a new Treaty of Westphalia 2 weeks ago. It was so succinct in terms of the catastrophic failure of the existing stated policies of bringing Russia to its knees and so forth, that it was very, very helpful to get these people to grab ways to move forward in the thicket, the thick, ugly environment of any challenge to the NATO narrative is your Putin propagandist. So I think there was real traction here. What you realize when you walk the halls of the U.S. Congress is the incongruities or the fractured political terrain. Almost every office we went to who were open to discussing these matters had big signs out their door saying, "We stand with Israel," and are among the most ferocious of the defenders of the current policies of genocide against Gaza. So we were not trying to tackle the whole terrain, but I just want to stress that we're not dealing, I mean, people may not know this, when the votes came up in Congress, only a handful of Democrats, largely progressive Democrats, voted against the policy of full funding for the genocide in Gaza. It was only Republicans who voted to say we should halt the aid to Ukraine. What we bring is this higher conception this Treaty of Westphalia approach, and we've got to just. I would urge everyone on this call to think through how you can try to intersect elected representatives in each of your countries with an approach that I think that we are in very fertile ground because of the enormity of the calamity of the existing direction of the policy, especially around the NATO-Russia confrontation, to jolt, force people into a different mode of thinking. And I think it was proven in yesterday's meetings. It was their limited number, obviously, but what we took away was that that even in as corrupted an institution as the U.S. Congress, the enormity of these dangers is registering now. Much like the European vote in the the EU elections a few weeks ago, it's called the right wing or even extreme right wing, but it actually is the place where most of the anti-war sentiment is collecting. We need to spread that, bring together much of the left that also is somewhat anti-war, not the Greens, et cetera, but there is something there to work with, the Sarah Wagenknecht kind of thing. But I want to just stress that the response shows in proof of principle that we're in the terrain where we cannot let ourselves have a back of the head idea that the corruption is insuperable. There's great openness. We've got to be very forceful, very direct, and yesterday was an encouraging day in that regard.
Thank you very much for that, Tim.